We are talking a very important topic on the angels and what that means for us. Psalms 91 verse 11 tells us, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." What a great idea that he will command his angels to guard us in all our ways. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about what is it, how do we think? Because and in terms of thinking, I mean, what do we think of in terms of our conscience? If we hear that little voice inside of us, if we get that little nudge sometimes spiritually that says we should be doing this or that, can we believe that that could be our guardian angel leading us in a particular direction? What do you think?
Well, I think the guardian angel definitely guides, and he speaks through our conscience. Our conscience is that inner judgment within us that knows the difference between good and evil. And this is why it's important to catechize little children and train them up so that they can understand good and evil and know the difference. Because our intellects, because of original sin, our intellects are darkened, our will is weakened, we're inclined to evil. And we have, baptism wiped away original sin, but it didn't take away its effects. We call that concupiscence. We're still oriented toward doing what's convenient, what feels good, not necessarily what is truly good and right. And yet the angel knows what is good for us. And as Trish brought up that, the angel is saddened by our sin. And there's a real sense. It's not a sadness of emotion. It's a sadness of knowledge. It's God is offended by sin. So the angels are offended by what God is offended by. So when we sin, it offends God and it offends the angel. St. Catherine of Siena once was shown the vision of a soul in the state of grace. And she said, had I not known for certainty, infallibly, that there's only one God, I was sorely tempted to worship. So the angel looks at our soul and sees our soul. And when they see our soul in state of grace, they see the reflection of God, but they know that we're a creature, so they don't worship us, they worship God. But when we sin, if it's mortal sin, that kills the life of God in our soul, and that light is put out. So they go from seeing this tremendous beauty to seeing darkness, and they want to guide us back. And so we have a conscience, which is our ability to choose right and wrong, to know the difference between good and evil, and to choose what is good and evil. And our angel is not the conscience, but the angel works through the conscience, through our judgment, to try and get us to choose the good, the true, and the beautiful, because that's what we're made for.
So that is a great distinction to make for all of our listeners. If you're feeling that nudge or whatnot, that might just be you. That might just be your conscience. Don't always attribute that to your angel, but the angel's going to cooperate with that, right? If our conscience is already telling us to do something and we're not going to listen to our conscience, the angel might further tell us, hey, listen to your conscience, right? So good, really, really good point to make, because it's important to distinguish that our conscience it goes into our free will.
Right.
The conscience is my free will. I'm gonna go for against my conscience. My angel's just there to help me out, make it more robust, if you will. Interesting that we mentioned that the emotions there, Mary Danielle, where you mentioned that, gosh, if we're in mortal sin, our light from God is turned off.
Right.
That eternal light of saving grace inside of us is turned off. And there is, shall we say, a sadness, almost kind of like the way a lot of people might experience a sadness going from day to night. We don't see the sun anymore. There is, and I have patients who suffer from, seasonal affective disorder. There's a little bit more depression when it's darker, right? We don't have light. We can sense that. Not that we get depressed all the time or anything like that, but there's a certain, something's missing.
Right.
The light is missing. And that's really important to consider. Now, we've talked a little bit about how angels, there's not that emotion of sadness. So how do the angels think? What is it that's going through their minds? How they don't have emotions? What do we think about that?
The angels they're intellectual creatures. They don't have a body. We human beings have a body, and because of that, we come to know things through our senses. We gather knowledge through our five senses. And then we have to process that knowledge. We have to decide what's good, what's bad, we were made for God. And God is the true good that we were made to choose. But because of original sin, we can confuse God with his creatures. That's why we can have pagan religions where we worship the creature. And Paul talks about this in Romans. We worship the creature instead of the creator. For the angels, they don't have that problem. They know directly, and they know through and through completely. So if they make a choice, they know the consequences of their choice, and they know it through and through. And there's no filtering it. There's no confusion. There's no filtering it through five senses and a body that we have. So they know directly and completely. And so when God communicates to them, they know.
So would it be fair to say, I mean, a great point, especially I love that we're incorporating the science, if you will, the scientific part. And what I mean by that is this: when we get to know something, we use our senses.
Right.
Right. And so if I see a liquid in a cup, I'm going to look at the color with my eyes. I'm going to maybe try to smell it and see what it smells like. I'm going to maybe even touch it and see how viscous it is or how liquidy, So I'm learning about this liquid because I'm approaching it through my senses. But for an angel, they just look at it, or shall we say they act on it, or whatever it is, and they automatically know everything about it in and out.
Right.
No matter what.
Exactly.
So I might, as a scientist, say, well, what kind of liquid is it? Let me put a match to it and see if it catches fire, right? Because I don't know. But the angel would know automatically. If I put a match to that, it's going to catch fire.
Right.
And so that we can equate to the decision they had to make at the moment of their creation.
Right.
Right. So Trish, what do you know about that?
Well, I know that at the moment of their creation, those who said, yes, I will serve, did and do for all eternity. They rejoice in it. They are serving God and whatever God's will is for them and for all of his creation. Right. That's their job. And they are joyful in doing that job. That is what they were created to do. Whereas the ones that chose not to serve, following the lead, I guess, of Lucifer, Satan. I was going to call him Lucifer, but when he made the choice, he became Satan.
Sure.
Following Satan's lead, they chose to go the other way. And really, it's black and white. It really, truly is.
Now here's an interesting question for you. So Mary Danielle, tell me about this, because a lot of people sometimes, and actually I heard this one time, supposedly in the middle of an exorcism, a priest was trying to exorcise a demon, and he said something to the demon about, why don't you just repent of your ways, or something along those lines. The priest mentioned some of that, and he said the demon quipped back at him and said, "You don't know your theology." And so tell me a little bit about that, because all of a sudden it's like a lot of people wonder, well, or actually there's actually sometimes a belief that, at the end of the world, or at the, Perusia something, the demons will, everybody will be saved because they're the people will repent and the demons will repent. What's going on with that? The angels made a choice. Are they able to repent? Are they able to say, you know what, I changed my mind, I'll go to heaven?
No, they're not. They're not able to do that. By the way, our son used to watch this show, Supernatural. And, the angel Gabriel is working with these guys who are fighting, looking out for monsters and fighting them and all this stuff.
Okay.
And at the end of the third or fourth season, all of a sudden, Gabriel goes rogue. And I'm like, nah, can't happen. Gabriel is Gabriel. He can't go rogue. He can't. The angels make a choice. When the angels know something, they know it through and through. So the angels knew. God showed them his plan. His plan was that instead of the angels communicating the light of their own knowledge to the lower creatures, the man that God was going to make, they would instead communicate to the lower creature man the image of another man, only that man would be his son. He would be a God man. When and how that was going to happen, none of them knew. But God would reveal it to them in his time. So they knew that they could either choose to serve and have eternity with God, and that if they chose to serve, then that they would see God face to face. They only had mystical knowledge of God before their choice. Or they could choose to reject that, and then they would never see God, and they would only know eternal frustration and eternal hatred. And Lucifer was cut to the quick. His pride. He wanted to, so his pride was like this burning building, and it's like, no, I'll have to go through that fire and humble myself, and I will not serve. And then Michael cries out, who was like God. And so he cannot repent because he knew without a doubt, there was absolute sure knowledge. We can't understand that because we as human beings don't have that kind of knowledge.